know why you're working in the region where she went missing. You're still looking, aren't you?
Come on!
You killed that guy!
Because he was going to kill me, you saved my life. This is about survival. Do you understand?
Samuels, listen to me. It's not safe here. Seegson's got this place locked tight. They're goddamn androids are killing people!
That's impossible. It's contrary to primary synthetic programming.
I've seen it, Samuels. I guess Seegson's got a different idea about synthetics. Listen to me! We don't have to do this!
Stop! Stop it, Marlo!
Marlo, please.
You heard what your mother did. She understood. If she was here, she'd be helping me.
To protect you. Don't worry. Don't worry about me. I'm sure I'll see you very soon. I love you, sweetheart.
Welcome to Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast. I am your host, Jaime Prater, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Patrick Green,
and Christian Motzka.
How you doing, guys?
Doing great. We're back with Isolation. I feel like there's so much going on. It's almost like, where do we even start with recording lately? Because we got Romulus stuff dropping. We've got, Isolation series in full bloom. We have Alien Day just a few weeks away from now. We have a short film that's in the final stages of production. I'm writing my ass off with the musical score right now. We got patrons coming out of the walls. So to that end, I'm going to go ahead and give a couple shout outs to that regard. Let's go back to March 1st. We got Matt H., Joshua Holko, Chris Hodgson, Michael Burns, Natasha Matthews, Barhan, tell me how to say that, please. Glenn Burfield, Matt Garza, and Xeno Pred Alien. Thank you so much for joining. If you want to join them, go to patreon.com/perfectorganism, go to perfectorganism.com/support. If you're like a free follower of us on Patreon, you're missing out on a ton of content. So you might want to consider upgrading to a paid tier because we don't really post that many things that are available if you're not. And also we love to use the money for the good of fandom. So, consider joining us. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and, I'm going to hand it over to Christian to introduce our guest. Before I do, a little context. So our guest, who's about to speak in a moment, wrote in with this just wonderful email to us a couple of months ago with all these amazing ideas about this Isolation series that we have been cooking up for quite a long time, because again, it's a 10-year anniversary. This is something that fandom asks for all the time. We really wanted to do it right and do it at the right time. And so he gave us so many great ideas that I was kind of like, where to even begin. And I got to say, the one that we're doing tonight was one of the ones I was most excited about because it gets at the heart of an issue that some people have with Isolation, but one that I think a lot of us who have played it, especially multiple times, don't really have an issue with. And that is, we have a game that on its face is very similar thematically, narratively, and even structurally to Alien, right? Everybody knows this is the story of Amanda Ripley seeking to find out what happened to her mother. That's something that, some people think is derivative, especially people I think who haven't really played the game very much. But there's other structural similarities to Alien as well. And what we think is such an interesting for conversation is to talk about why maybe it doesn't feel derivative, why it does feel fresh and interesting. So tonight we're going to kind of hash this idea out of how to thread the narrative needle, is how we've been saying it. How do you tell something that feels familiar enough to be a gateway into the material, but doesn't feel derivative and allows you to kind of experience a story in a new way? So with that being said, Christian, go ahead and get us going.
All right, so our mystery guest who wrote this wonderful series of emails to us is named CP. CP, welcome to the show.
Very, very similitudinous day to all of you.
So whenever we have somebody new on the show, we like to ask them what their first experience was with the Alien franchise. What movie did you start with?
For me, it was Aliens. So I was probably about 10 years old. We recorded it off the TV on VHS. So this would have been in the very late 80s, I suppose. And I just sort of watched it more times than I can remember. At one point I would have come home from school I watched it almost every day as well. I didn't know anything about Alien. I know that Ripley was referring to things that happened in her past, like 57 years ago, but it never occurred to me that that was actually a film. I was just happy to accept that she'd had a bad experience in the past without needing to know any more about the story for me to enjoy Aliens to the max. And I just absolutely loved it. Grew to love all the Marines. Apone was particularly my favorite. He just had so many good lines, and it's just, that gravelly voice. He was awesome. My heart wrenches a little bit every time I watch him get taken away in that film. But back then I would have known virtually every word of the film off by heart. And the version I had off the TV included some dodgy overdubs, like Hudson saying things like, "Man, that's a mother of a signal," when the aliens close in on operations, and it must have aired pre-Watershed or something like that. But yeah, it's just really awesome. I couldn't even tell you when I first saw Alien, probably not until the mid-90s, I suppose. But the fact I don't remember it means it didn't have that same impact on me. And it's only reasonably recently, probably in the last 5 years, that Alien moved ahead of Aliens for me, and it is now my favorite entry into the whole Aliens universe. But also I was late to Isolation as a result of that. I know it came out 10 years ago. I picked it up secondhand 2020, I think, for the Xbox, and I've been vaguely aware of it, but I didn't really know anything about the plot or style of the game before. I think in my head it was going to be something else like Colonial Marines, but like the experience was everything I could have hoped for and a lot more, because it absolutely scared the bejesus out of me playing it. And I think this is something you talked about in the first Alien Isolation episode, that I had to play it in daylight, in half-hour bursts, just to keep the fear in check. And I've now played through it 5 times in total, but I still get that buzz, that elevated heart rate every time I play it. And I just think it's such a great achievement that they were able to offer, the everyday fan that type of fear-filled experience that I just don't think you get even watching the film. The films will scare you to a certain extent, but you don't feel like you're in mortal terror. And that's what Alien Isolation does for me. Yeah, I know it's a game, but still, I'm full of fear all the way through. And I think it fits into the universe so perfectly. I couldn't commend it more highly.
So if this is an episode about themes, I'm curious. I say this over and over, and I feel like I always need to say it for context that I don't play I played the game a few times here and there, like for 15 minutes, less than 15 minutes, running into walls, not being able to control anything. But I was one of the people that felt like, well, I don't know if I feel like the game itself or the story of the game is derivative, but I definitely think it really, really works in the context of a game. I think it's so immersive, and everything about it, like you're in this world. You're a member of the Nostromo, or you're a member, or you are definitely, obviously, you are Amanda on Sevastopol. I'm curious if you guys felt like it was derivative, or did you feel like it just felt like a natural next story or side story to Ripley's story? And having watched, knowing the full arc of everything, and I used to criticize it a little bit, thinking, yeah, it's derivative, but most of the time it was in context of people like, oh, they should make this into a movie. I'm like, no, we don't need another Ripley movie. We don't need another version of Ripley in a movie. But I feel like this game is really wholly unique, and I'm curious if you guys feel the same way.
I'm really glad you said that about the movie, because I'm in agreement with you. And I think as we've been approaching this episode, I've been trying to figure out why I feel that way, like why I feel like it works as a game, but not necessarily as like a film. Here's my experience of the story the first time I played it. So I didn't even think about it being derivative whatsoever, even though like it very clearly, it's so firmly entrenched in Alien and in the characters that we know, like they're referenced a lot, that it feels very much like Coming Home. I mean, it was such a joy to just have an experiential entry point, like CP was saying, where it's like happening to me, that I didn't even really stop and think very much about the story until pretty far into the game when I could kind of like chill out and process things a little bit. What the game does a lot is it gives you things that reference or feel kind of aligned with moments in the film, but are different enough that it doesn't like distract you. So, there's kind of like a beacon in the beginning of the game in a way, in that, you're sent on the ship, on the Torrens, to go investigate, this black box that's been recovered and is at this, floating station in space. And so there's kind of like a beacon-esque element to it, but you don't really notice it. Then later we find out there really is a beacon, and that the reason the black box was recovered and all this stuff happened in the first place, and the reason why the Sevastopol is falling apart, is because this recovery crew went and brought the alien on board. So like that does actually happen in the game as well. Another thing is that there's this fourth act, although in the context of the game it's like the 20th act, where there's like an alien on board the final ship, the final part of the ship that Amanda is trying to escape on, exactly the way that it happens to her mother. And it gets, in kind of a different way, but a similar way, blown out of an airlock, although she gets blown out with it. So there's a lot of things that are extremely referentially similar to Alien. But what's so great about Isolation is, as you're kind of uncovering all of these things that feel very much like echoes from the film, it's surprising you with them. So like you kind of think you're walking into something that you have context for, and it turns on its head. So for example, you at one point you come across this sort of like company brass kind of character, and that you have the colonial marshals, right? You have this guy Waits, who is quite a dick and reveals himself to be even more of one than you think when you first meet him, voiced of course by William Hope. You have Ricardo, who's his like deputy, and is, in my mind, probably my favorite character in the game. I think Ricardo was like just an amazing character who you actually get to play as in the DLC too. And they're kind of like colonial marine adjacent characters a little bit, but they're different and they're unexpected, and they do different things and they react differently. You have so you have a destruction sequence happen a couple of times in this, at least probably three times in this game, where you have something. For one thing, the whole Sevastopol basically is in a destruction sequence the entire time, which again references Alien, but the way that it happens is unexpected and interesting. So all of this is kind of coming around to say that I think the game, because it subverts our expectations just as frequently as it fulfills our expectations, doesn't feel boring or doesn't feel predictable. Whereas a film, because it has to happen much quicker, you can't experience it yourself. You can't discover things, for yourself the way you can in a game. To me, that wouldn't work quite as well.
I was just going to ask, is the station like entering the orbit of that planet and it's going to burn up, essentially? Is that what's happening? Okay.
It's worth mentioning there's a really, really interesting backstory for the station unrelated to what's happened with the alien being brought there. That this station was already being shut down, and it was going to be, I believe, let to fall in. I might be wrong about that, but there are all of these log entries that you can find, and angry notes that people have written, that Amanda discovers about how poorly the station has been maintained, how money has been spent the wrong way, everyone's leaving. It's a really fascinating character in and of itself. It isn't just a series of hallways and rooms that you have to get through and checkpoints and that kind of thing. It becomes so much more lived in. I have a problem with the timeline of it, to be quite honest. That's probably my biggest complaint about this game, is the founding of Sevastopol Station puts it before the events of Alien. If there was a spaceport within, a parsec or whatever of the Nostromo, they absolutely would have gone there. They would have signaled them. And it creates this idea that there's actually hustle and bustle and traffic and space in the exact area where the unknown planetoid is discovered. And I think that takes so much away from Alien. So I retcon that and say this station was built, 3, 4, 5 years after the events of Alien, just to keep that from happening, because the idea of the Nostromo being so far from any other place, it's been diverted from its course. It's way out of where they expect it to be. I want that to be maintained, but there's nothing inherently, you have to go digging to even find out the fact that the station is as old as it is. So I'm having a nerd rage about something that I had to go find. What I'm trying to say though is the overall state of the station is already falling apart before the alien even shows up. That just makes it a hell of a lot worse.
Yeah, I'm a bit like both Patrick and Christian on this. I never even considered it to be derivative as I went through the process of playing it. It is, a later time when you sit and process, again, as Patrick just said, say, yeah, it's got the similar beats. And some of it is very similar indeed. And, maybe by the end when, it is the third destruct sequence you're going through, you think, yeah, maybe they could have done this differently. Or, I really think the game probably could have done without the last couple of hours of gameplay. Arguably, it gives you too much, and it keeps poor Amanda under such duress for such a long period of time. You're starting to think by the end, just let her get safe, please. But, that doesn't happen to her at all, poor thing. But the derivative elements that are there in the game, just, you don't really notice them as you're playing because the experience is so immersive. And I think there is so much to enjoy. And there's, from my point of view, the whole backstory, the telling, the way it's told in the story, the way it unravels through the log entries and all that sort of thing. It's just, there's so much merit in the story. Something that Jaime has talked a lot about is, the reverence for the subject matter. And it's absolutely there. They haven't just created a game like the Colonial Marine swill. They've really mapped out this whole thing over a period of decades. And they've filled in a lot of the gaps about why this station is the way it is, why it's a realistic environment. And, to Christian's point, Sevastopol it's like the Nostromo, it's like a character within its own right. But it's the picture painted as if this was a location that was doomed almost from the start. The early log entries that you find of Julia Jones, the journalist, she writes about how this is a space station that nobody needed. It's run by a company we all forgot. It's a backwater running with a population just a tenth of its optimal capacity. It's a ghost town where gun crime is rife. And even before it was decommissioned, 10 years before it was decommissioned, the Sol Thetis flight path that we're told, which I think is the one that the Nostromo was on, was rerouted. So really this thing is just a floating wasteland in space. And this is, 10 years, 15 years before the events of the game. So it's such a interesting and believable environment that they've managed to create. When Amanda arrives, your experience of it is, all right, things have just been blown up because they're trying to kill the alien, and it's in a heck of a state. But even before that, a long time before that, it was creaking at the joints. It was obsolete. It was just a miserable place to live and work. And I think it just really fascinates me that you are put into that environment and, try and pick your way through it. And all the people you meet in it are just like believable human beings, that they've got their own motivations. And I think it's just really good writing by the Creative Assembly team that they were able to make this environment that seems so real and so lived in, a really natural extension of the Nostromo and the Nostromo crew that we found in Alien, just on a much bigger scale. And it works so wonderfully for me. And I'm sure we'll talk about some of the other secondary characters as we go on. But what you revealed about the history of the station and the people on it through the logs, for me, it's so fascinating. And now I've played through it 5 times. It was on my most recent playthrough, which was just 6 weeks ago. After that, I sort of printed all the logs and I've put them all in date order. There's like nearly 50 pages of A4 about this. So you can really see sequentially what has been going on at the station before Amanda gets there over, a period of years, but particularly, from September to December when Amanda arrives, you see like the descent of what is going on in there. And it's brilliant. And I agree. I don't think Alien Isolation in itself would be a great film. Too much of Amanda just going from A to B. That's, the novelization of Alien Isolation was really poor. And I think you've discussed it on the podcast before. Really boring, conveys none of the fear. And it's got some by the numbers, bleeding heart story about Amanda's poor upbringing, which may be relevant for how her character is in the book, but it's really entry-level stuff. Whereas in the game, you've got all this massive amount of really fascinating information and fascinating characters. And that to me is part of a story that could really be interestingly told. And I said to Patrick in the email I sent that event television, a couple of series of Alien Isolation, you're starting it months before Amanda is even involved. You're finding out what is Marlowe's link to the station in the first place. I think he delivered black market goods. He goes off, finds the alien. The people on the station are trying to deal with knowing they're on this decommissioned station. Marlowe comes back, Alien Unleashed, descent into anarchy over a period of 4 or 5 weeks. And there is so much good material within that is you uncover in the logs. Amanda doesn't even need to be in half of the series. She can just come in at one point, and we can see her struggles, but intercut with everything else that's going on in the station. And there's just, characters in there that you actually could love. Patrick mentioned Ricardo. What a great character he is. And again, he's someone that your heart really goes out to. But you've got other characters, Lingard, the Doctor. We don't really know what happens to her. Her fate undoubtedly would be a real tearjerker if you got to know her in TV series. She would meet some grisly fate. And yeah, I think it could be absolutely terrific. Not as a film, but potentially as a TV series somewhere down the line.
I think that Ransom, for example, is a character that never actually appears in the game, but is such a powerful character just outside of your view, because he makes certain things happen, he makes certain deals happen, and he's sort of the Carter Burke of the story, but he doesn't actually have to be there. Maybe he's in the DLC.
Yeah, he's a playable character in one of the DLCs. Yeah.
Oh,
but he's not. But you never see him in the game. He's just in the shadows the whole time.
In the DLC, you're in his apartment, right? You play as him, something like that. Okay. But in the actual, the main part of the story, he's someone that you hear about. People bring him up as either someone that has threatened them, or we find out all the dealings that he had done, but he's not in it, which I think is perfect. It's just such a wonderful presence. People always are asking for a movie or series about the fall of Hadley's Hope. And I can't think of a more bleak and depressing thing, because we know it. We really do know what happened to 157 people, and only Newt gets out. But you could do something similar. You could give people a similar story with Sevastopol Station's fall, because there's so much more room and so much more ambiguity. We don't know who got off the station before Amanda arrived. There's so many stories that could be told that don't have to involve Amanda, as CP said. I really do agree with that.
And I think part of the beauty of this is realizing that Sevastopol really is a character in itself. And that's something that's like such a cliche. We say it all the time about any time that something has an interesting setting, blah, 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 blah. But it really is such a fascinating place to spend 26 hours of your life, or however long you play the game for. Even just architecturally, the fact that it's arranged around these spires, these like enormous towers in space with these elevators and the tram system that connects them to each other. It's just such an interesting place with so much history behind it. Like SCP is saying, it gradually becomes clear that this place was falling apart long before it was falling into the gas giant. And it's because they were cutting corners. Like we have this whole investigative reporting series going on that is like, I agree. I love those. And you find out like that this thing has really been collapsing for a long time. And then, as you're finding these diaries, you're noticing it in the environment. Like you're seeing, that there are barricades put up that have nothing to do with the alien. Like they're from people, like barricading themselves in stock rooms and things like that. You see graffiti everywhere. You see fires that are just raging that nobody has bothered to put out. You see pillaging. You see that storefronts have been broken and things have been stolen from them. And it's just this wonderful, like, it's so unexpected, the amount of life that you find in Sevastopol. And that's something that I want to kind of talk about for a second. So in Alien, the sort of recurring motif is you enter into the unknown, and in the unknown is death, right? When an Alien, when they touch down on LV-426, death awaits them. It's just this void with this monstrosity within it, right? When they touch down at Hadley's Hope, the Colonial Marines and aliens, like they walk into death, and there's only one person. Oh, I mean, I guess maybe more than one person, but only one real person surviving it, right? It's just this empty death land. That's kind of what we're prepped for with the Sevastopol as well, because as we're approaching it, we're not getting a signal back. Like, does it seem like there's any electrical activity? Like wings are being turned off. So we're kind of expecting to walk into this ghost ship, but it's not. Like, one of the first things that happens to you is you get grabbed by this guy, Axel, who is like so funny and so interesting and so brusque. And he's trying to barter with you. He's like, if you get me off the ship, like, I'll get you out of here, you know, and we'll get off together. And meanwhile, he's like completely cutthroat. And it's just, and you realize like he's like that, not because of the alien, but because of the people. Like the people that are aboard Sevastopol still have become like incredibly violent and are just like basically disregarding, you know, anything at this point. And it's really, really scary in that regard too. One thing I want to talk about also, with, you know, running the risk of kind of going all over the place, is the way that this game approaches artificial intelligence, which is something that has been touched in slight ways through the films, like, you know, with Mother and with, you know, Hyperdyne droids and things like that. But in isolation, because we have so much time to play it and because so much is happening within it, we end up like seeing all these different facets to the way artificial intelligence functions in the Alien universe. Everybody always talks about the working Joes, right? These horrible Seegson androids that are falling apart and unstable and crazy and murderous and disregarding any basic tenets of Asimov's robot laws, right? But there's a lot of other things too. So the first character we meet who's not Amanda is an android. It's Samuels, who is another character who I just adore endlessly. I think he's just, and whoever, I wish I had his name pulled up, whoever's playing him just does such a beautiful job expressing this like deep, compassionate professionalism. And he's the one, of course, who says, like, I know why you're still looking. I know that you're here because you're still looking for your mother. And Samuels goes on to have this wonderful arc through this whole thing where he, you know, eventually sacrifices himself. And the whole time you're kind of wondering, because, you know, he's sort of like a company plant, that you're wondering if he is going to be sabotaging Amanda's life, but he's not. He's trying to save her. He's trying to get her out. And that's beautiful. And of course, he's also communing with Father, which is the system that's running the Sevastopol. And we get this incredible meditation on, or not meditation, exploration into what Father represents. And we get to see physically how it operates and how it functions. We get to go into the memory core. We get to see like all of these just amazing things that are kind of implied in the background in the other films. But here we get to like not only kind of see how some elements of these things work, but we get to actually like explore them and to see what happens as this AI is similarly in a decaying orbit of its own. That is something that I really love. And again, it goes to Jamie's question about how, you know, whether or not it feels derivative. To me, like that's a great example of how it doesn't, because it takes familiar things and it goes so deeply into them in such different ways that we don't kind of notice that they're similar anymore, because we feel like we're kind of exploring and finding it out for ourselves. And that's, I think, pretty incredible.
Did they call it Father or Apollo?
Is it Apollo? Yeah. Maybe it is.
Because Father's resurrection. I was like,
That's
oh my God.
Here's Apollo, can confirm.
It's
But
Apollo. Yeah. I don't know why I'm saying Father.
Apollo is Joseph Conrad's father's name. That's where they got it from. So
I'd
it
like
is
to
still
pretend
Father.
like I knew that, but yeah, we'll keep it.
Boy, they combed all through Joseph Conrad for names in this thing. I mean, Marlowe, Ransom, Torrens. It's all, they took a lot of good ones.
So because you're playing as Amanda, are there any Ripley affectations, or is she fundamentally a different character? Or does she say things that Ripley said? I'm just curious how far they go with her.
When I played through it, I didn't necessarily look at Amanda and think, oh, she's just like Ripley. Not at all, actually. I thought she stands on her own 2 feet very nicely. I think a good thing they managed to do was avoid having Amanda use anything that Ripley herself has said in any of the films as well. And it's so easy to fall into that. Oh, let's give the fans an Easter egg. Let's give a character a line from Ripley or a pone or something like that. It happens all the time, particularly in the novels. And you think, oh, do you need to really be giving me this? I know the subject matter well enough. I don't need to be given all of this, you know, all these callbacks. And I think, you know, unless I've missed something, Amanda, she is her own character. When we meet her, probably a few years younger than Ripley was in Alien, but she's a bit harder on the edge than Ripley. And I think, you know, you get the sense she's had quite a difficult life and a hard upbringing, and she's incredibly self-reliant and, you know, dependable in the same way that Ripley is. But it doesn't feel like a rip-off to me, even when she's marching around the station later with a flamethrower, which, you know, that does delight the game player. but it isn't essential to use that either. There are ways you can avoid using the flamethrower, although it is bloody handy when you're in a tight spot. But for me, Amanda, she ticks the boxes for me of what you want for in a compelling central character without seeming overly Ripley-ish, other than that being her name. And I think her motivations are realistic. They feel authentic for the character. If she lost her mother at the age of 10, has been hoping that she'll at some point find out what happened to her, possibly been in trouble in and out of juvie and jail, if you believe some of the backstory that is told. And she's tried to, find her own way, keep her own feet. She can't rely on anyone else in her life. And then when Samuel then comes and says, hey, I know about your story, and we think we might have found information about your mother. Yeah, of course she would go for it as well. There's no doubt in my mind that the character, as written in the game, would jump at that opportunity. And because of her pragmatic nature and her independence as a character, all of the things she is asked to do in the game sort of do feel that, yes, this is within her. And actually, I think she is more capable of survival than Ripley was in Alien. Ripley got a little bit lucky, perhaps you could say. She wasn't where the alien was when she was going to rescue Jonesy, whereas she grows into the hero role, whereas I think Amanda has just got that hard, don't give a damn edge about her because of her upbringing. She's got less to lose than Ripley had, because Ripley had a daughter back in there. So I think that goes some way to explaining why Amanda is thrust into this environment and is so happy just to say, yeah, all right, yeah, I'm in. Tell me what to do, because I do want to live, but I've got nothing to lose. So if no one else is going to do this stuff, count me in. So I think she's a very cool, a very strong character in her own right.
Can I just jump on something quick in that? I love and am vibing very much with everything you're saying. And one thing I just want to add to it that always delights me about Isolation is that she's an engineer, and that defines the game in so many ways. The fact that she has this technical skill set, she's able to fix things and to find solutions to things. And so the ways in which she's heroic and brave are very different from the ways in which her mother was heroic and brave. Like, she's consistently trying to problem solve, to realign things, to figure out ways to make junctions between boxes. And that is ultimately what gets her out, is her ability to problem solve. And I love that. And that's part of why she feels very different.
The game designers had to make some very careful choices because, as is revealed, there are multiple aliens on this station. And so Amanda ends up facing off with more aliens than her mother did in the first film. However, within the confines of the game, it still feels believable and acceptable. And once she knows that her mother dealt with this, and that her mother essentially sacrificed herself to save Amanda and the rest of humanity, to keep this alien from getting back to Earth, then you have a little bit of that Aliens-esque revenge. Amanda has a grudge against the alien the same way that Ellen had a grudge against the alien, and actually for the same relationship reason, where Ellen was mad that the aliens had cost her daughter. In this, Amanda is mad that the aliens had cost her mother. Now, where I draw a very strict line is there's only this game. I don't accept Blackout. I don't accept the Dark Horse comics. They take Amanda and they turn her into this ridiculous alien-killing superhero, because that's what the expanded universe does. It churns up really good characters quite often. But in the confines of this game, she's amazing, and she's very... CP hit it on the head. She's almost a gruffer version of Ripley. She doesn't have a career path ahead of her, for one thing, where Ellen Ripley is kind of a hard ass because she has a set of rules that she wants to follow. It's clear that this is not where she wants to be. She wants to go further. She wants to be the captain of a ship, perhaps. Amanda doesn't have any of that. Amanda is getting by with her skill sets, hoping to get lucky and find out some clue, to find out what happened to her mother. And it makes for a different character.
I'd like to come in there briefly as well, because I just 1,000,000% agree with what you just said there, Christian, that part of why I love Amanda as a character is that she hasn't gone on to become an overused presence in other games, like sequel game or books. Yeah, no, she's appeared in the comics, and she was referenced in that really awful recent novel. I can't remember which one, when Chad McLaren is in it. Oh, terrible book. But the comics in particular, they're much more fast and loose with the canon anyway. You can take them or leave them. And I certainly leave them because, if you consider the comics alien gospel, they're the most commonly encountered creature in the universe. And it's the exact opposite of everything that is needed to keep them mysterious and terrifying. And yeah, I love Isolation. I think it is brilliant, but I'm glad that's where Amanda's canonical alien journey ends in terms of her being a central character. There was talk about a sequel, but again, having Amanda pitted against the aliens again, multiple occasions, that starts to stretch credibility in the same way it does with Ripley somehow always being the one that is facing the aliens. Like even the backstory to Alien Blackout, which again, like Christian, I don't consider canonical, was weak and indicative of the difficulties that are inherent in trying to shoehorn beloved characters into beloved franchises more than is welcome or necessary. So Amanda, thanks for the memories, but I don't feel I need to see her in the Alien universe again, unless it is a televised telling of the Alien Isolation story.
Plus, we know what happens to Amanda. Amanda grows old, she gets married, she dies. That's Amanda's story. We know it from the special edition of Aliens, which makes the ending of Alien Isolation so wonderful. She's floating in space. It's a very bleak ending. There is a light shines on her, but we don't actually need to know how that story plays out. I never need to know who her husband is. Alien Colony War was the name of that awful novel that goes so far as to say, no, Amanda Ripley didn't actually die. She's in hibernation. We're keeping her in a secret location, and she's young. That's the other thing. I asked the writer, I asked him flat out, like, are you telling me that Amanda isn't an old woman? He said, oh no, don't believe the company. That's the company lying to Ellen Ripley. No, forget all that. You're at the point of asking us to believe that huge swaths of the movie are no longer canonical, just so your little fan fiction can play out. No, thank you.
That's almost seems as bad as Out of the Shadows, where they wake Ripley up. She's floating. They wake her up. She has this adventure, erase her memory and put her back in cryo and send her on her way. But what I like about Isolation on its face, which is similar to what I think is interesting about Romulus, is it's an inverse version of Alien, where instead of going to a derelict alien craft, they're going to a derelict human craft. And instead of finding no aliens in it, I mean, they find eggs, but they find actual aliens in it. So I like that it's kind of changing the story a little bit, and it is a somewhat familiar, but also not familiar at all. And I think that's a smart way to tell a story in a familiar world. And I think to that point, stuff like, it's called Alien Isolation, there are facehuggers, there's chest bursters, all that stuff. We don't need that many hints back. We know we're in an alien film. And I think as we approach Romulus, I've had similar, because there's been some comments that the Wallfish score is going to have hints of Jared Goldsmith there. I'm thinking, we know we're in an alien film. It's called Alien Romulus. We're on a ship. It looks like the Nostromo. It's an alien film. You don't need to keep reminding us that we're in an alien film. So it's great to know this about Isolation. But again, from what I've experienced personally, it does feel fully fresh. It does not feel like anything that I've seen before. My question, though, I think, again, as a layperson, though, is there's a whole segment in the game where you're on the Nostromo and you what's that about? Can you explain that? Someone explain that?
That's also downloadable content. So that's not actually in the game itself, but it's something you can play if you would like to. And again, I think, you're asking great questions as always. And I think this is a really good one in particular because it illuminates something that I'm really grateful for with Isolation, which is that you don't have to do any of these other things. The DLC can be kind of derivative because it's kind of the same thing over and over again. And you're just trying to kind of get through an escape room sequence and, and like we mentioned on our first episode of the series, the level of detail, maybe even the verisimilitude of the DLC is not up to par with the main game. And that's fine because the people who are playing the DLC are kind of the diehards who have already beaten the main campaign a couple of times and they're just looking to kind of continue with the game. But the game still stands on its own and it doesn't need those things to kind of feed into it. similar to, and this is kind of what we're talking about tonight. I think this idea of like the stratification of storytelling, similar to all of these amazing documents that CP is compiling, which by the way, I want to get a copy of at some point. You can explore as much of that or as little of it as you would like to. A lot of us the first time through are too preoccupied with how scared we are and how much time we're spending in lockers to look at anything, and then like I mentioned on our first episode, you end up kind of and subsequent playthroughs finding more out, and then eventually you kind of know where those things are, so you spend more time on them because you kind of know you're safe. And then you get to a point like CP where you have it all, printed out in a giant document, and then you have an encyclopedic knowledge of what's really going on. But again, the game you don't need all of that to enjoy the game and to love it. And that brings me to another point that I have that you're kind of inspiring me to think about, which is this idea of the sequel. This is like the biggest elephant in the alien room almost of my lifetime. I mean, like everybody has been constantly asking for 10 years for the sequel to Isolation. We have had a front row seat to this, especially Jaime and I, back before Christian was on board. This was it was something people have always been asking about. And we got Blackout, which people were so angry about because it was kind of like, it felt like it was their like half-assed attempt to do a sequel to Isolation, and people misinterpreted that. And then we had the horrible web series from IGN, which to this day is one of the funniest things I've ever seen in my life, which was also just abominable. And it just felt like, why are they even, giving fan service with this shit when the game is such a masterpiece? And so that brings me to this idea of like, would I want a sequel to Isolation? Going off of what CP was saying earlier and Christian, like my answer to that is no, I don't want that. I don't. I want this game to be a perfectly contained piece of art. And we live in a culture where we are averse to that. Like everything has to be sequelized and franchised, and everything has to be just endless. Like we can't allow stories to end. Look at something like Mindhunter, for example, right? David Fincher's masterpiece on Netflix. Like that, I think I speak for everyone listening to this who's seen it when we say that that would be amazing if we never got an end to that, if we could just watch so much of it. But he walked away from it after 2 seasons because it wasn't profitable enough and it was taking too much time. And now it just is allowed to live there as a kind of completed, incomplete story. And that's kind of beautiful. Similarly, Amanda's story, because we don't really know, like Christian was saying, what happens in those intervening decades. We don't have to have answers all the time. We're allowed to just kind of sit with that and to imagine it for ourselves. And so that's the great gift this game gives us, is that it provides us with so much background and so many answers and so many inroads to learn more about the creature's life cycle and the way that everything functions. And then it also knows when to back off and to like avoid giving things and spoiling things and allowing us to have our imagination fill those gaps in. The way the game ends, for those of you who haven't played it, is she's floating in space, right? And she slowly is kind of turning, and then this light, like Christian was mentioning, a light kind of just glances across her windscreen, or on her visor. And that's it. And then the game cuts to black, and it's very abrupt. And I just love it because it could be anything, it could be literally anything. And we don't need to know the answer to that. And the fact that we don't know is part of why I think this game is so important, because it trusts us to fill in for ourselves what we think happened to her.
The story they gave to Blackout to basically have Amanda immediately facing off with aliens again, I think was some sort of rubbish about she got picked up and taken to a space station, and the space station was owned by Weyland-Yutani and they'd been doing experiments on aliens. That normal nonsense, which straight away ruins the impact of Alien Isolation, if you are to consider it canon, which I certainly don't. And again, I fully agree with what Patrick is saying, is that when I first played Alien Isolation, that just the abruptness of the ending, I thought, I've just been playing this game for like 30 hours and that's all I get. But then the more, you think about it, the more you play it, it doesn't actually matter. I'm satisfied that Amanda is being rescued. That's all I need to know. And, there are interesting things that must happen to her afterwards, not least some sort of explosive showdown between Amanda and company representatives at some point, which I'm just happy to imagine. I don't need that to be set out, and I hope it never is, because, maybe they offered her 100 million in adjusted dollars for her silence, which she thought, well, I'm going to use that money to live well and maybe explore the area of space for my mother. But please never actually confirm that with me. I just am happy to think, okay, Amanda is going to go live a good life. And it's not chasing aliens with Zula every Sunday afternoon. It's sort of living a good life. Still, yes, in the hope that she will encounter her mother again with a whole new level of understanding what she went through. And whether the company lied about her really being dead, who knows? Again, we don't need to know. And that's why that Colony Wars book for me was just so, well, one of the reasons why that book was such a, I think I've said rubbish already, but it just was a very weak entry into the canon.
Was the Adventures with Zula, was that a Dark Horse, like, expanded universe issue or series?
Oh, many of them. Yeah.
Really?
That went on for about 12 issues with Zula Hendricks.
Wow.
It started out, though, nicely in Defiance, you know, the one with Tristan Jones doing the artwork. Zula Hendricks and Amanda Ripley bump into each other on the moon, I think, on a colony or something, and they just share a quick moment. And that gets picked up again in Alien Prototype, the novel, which is about Zula Hendricks. And there's a little bit of Ripley, but it's just a touch, just a nice little bit. But then this other guy picked up the series, or maybe he was the writer on Defiance, I don't know. And it just literally became Zula and Amanda versus the evil company and a million aliens and like 3 queens in one hive, and they blow the whole thing up with a nuke. And, you know, it's just, what I was going to actually bring up is Creative Assembly understood the tightrope you have to walk if you're going to put something between Alien and Aliens. It's my biggest fear with Romulus, to be quite honest. My biggest fear is that where this game so successfully placed its story in here in such a way that Weyland-Yutani is involved, but they can't get there fast enough. They don't know for sure that there's an alien until, you know, Amanda's already there, and they're trying to do things. So certain things are happening, like the Working Joes go bad because the company, Weyland-Yutani, buys out Seegson, buys out the station, and turns all the robots on. It flips the kill switch so that they can secure this station to come retrieve the alien. And they don't get it. They don't get it. And enough time passes between the end of this game and Aliens that you can still believe, okay, the company has buried those records, or it's a very small group of people that know about it. And it's so contained and they don't get anything from it. Romulus is a couple years later. And so I absolutely hope that some reference to Sevastopol Station sneaks into the movie. We know that it will in the set dressing, but I'd like to hear somebody say that name. But when you place something between 2 films, you risk creating a dissonance with the second film, where they no longer agree with each other. And that's a huge fear whenever anyone does this. And Dark Horse Comics was playing in that exact area, this exact time period, for a good while, and it just became more and more preposterous. They were doing a huge disservice to Aliens. If you were ever to watch Alien and then read all of these comics and then watch Aliens, it wouldn't make any sense. It's just the universe, as CP said, is teeming with these creatures. There's every planet you go to has aliens on it in those comic books. I'm someone that loves Dark Horse, and I couldn't believe how poorly they handled that. This game did it well. I hope that Romulus as well can figure out how to create a self-contained story that at the end still leaves you in the same place for when you start Aliens, that we still have this question of who actually knows within the company.
I endorse that view that Christian has just put forward as well. I share some of those fears, and until I saw the trailer for Romulus, and I do think it actually looks really cool from what I've seen, I had been worried about it before. I'm saying it's going to mess something up in the continuum. And one of my biggest fears that it was going to mess something up with Alien Isolation, because I really do treasure that as part of the Alien universe. And how that backstory, I think, is told will make or break my personal enjoyment of the film, because I think the way it's done in Isolation is really perfect. It doesn't stretch credibility, and it really does weave into that overall narrative between Alien and Aliens pretty flawlessly. I mean, yeah, Marlowe might have hit the 1,000,000-to-1 jackpot in finding the flight recorder in the first place, but once he had it, he does what any down on his luck salvager would do, and he'll follow it to its source, trying to see what he can get out of it. How Romulus is going to sort of get around the fact that they have got this thing that the company supposedly still hasn't managed to to figure out, such as why they are so interested in aliens and going back to the planet, is really going to, it's really going to be the acid test, I think, no pun intended, of how successful that film is, not as a standalone entity, but how well it fits into the full universe and how well it satisfies fans like us who actually do really care about how the whole cohesive universe hangs together. And also, like Christian, would love it if there is just a reference to Sevastopol by name. You see in the trailer that their shuttle is coming into a space station. Maybe when they get onto the station and they find it's abandoned, they can say, hey, maybe it's like that, something that happened at that Sevastopol station that, you heard about 10 years ago. And like, I would actually be roaring my approval in the cinema if that happens. Just canonize Sevastopol, please. And I think I'll be a really happy viewer.
As it relates to themes, we know that Alien there are so many things going on. Like, it's the life cycle of the creature itself happens when there's a host, where it's kind of like rape. It's very psychosexual. There's all of these things kind of going on there. There are real fundamental themes happening in Alien, and I'm curious, what are those in Isolation, or are they as pronounced in Isolation?
Hopefully I'm addressing your question here. I think in terms of what they reveal about the life cycle, it's fine. It's not giving anything away that we don't already know. But there is an element of mystery within the story about, you could argue, about what prevents the infestation of the station happening more quickly than it does. Because you go through the logs, you find out that it was, I think, November the 13th, the chest burster came out of Foster. 3 days later, they're still searching for it in medical. They don't know where it is, but they've locked down the medical department because they believe it is still in there. But it's not until, Amanda arrived, which is the 11th of December, and the preceding days before that, as set out in the logs, that the shit has really hit the fan on the station, if you like. Yes, people have been going missing, but then you're starting to get the log accounts of the attacks have happening. The alien drops into a room full of survivors, and it's described as being like a fox falling into a hen house. And some of the descriptions are brilliant. There's a first-person description of a survivor who saw someone ripped in half, someone else taken away. So what I think is interesting is that, there's the potential for the alien to reproduce very quickly, and whether it's through egg morphing or what, we don't know in Isolation, which I think is really good that mystery is preserved. But there is a period of time, in the 2-week spell after the alien is birthed through Foster, that there isn't really much side of it on the station. Yeah, few people have gone missing, but Ransom is still talking to Waits about, hey, when they come to get this flight recorder, we don't need to mention the missing people thing. So they're not themselves that worried yet. So they don't know that the threat is a lot bigger than it is. They seem to think it is still just the one alien. So maybe at some point this alien goes away, it is drawn to the reactor core, which is where the nest is set up. Who knows, maybe it is trapped in there for a period of time. We just don't know. So I think they handle that aspect of it really well, because in theory, Amanda could arrive at the station and there's 200 aliens wandering around the station, and there certainly are a number of them, but the fact that there is only seems to be one tailing her around the station is sort of suggestive that the rule packet that was sent through by Weyland-Yutani after they bought the station was to get the working Joes to lock down where the alien is based, so to prevent it from getting clear, so that the people on the station are killing it, and so that they can retrieve it. Who knows? Again, that's not set out, so it lets the player or the viewer work it out for themselves. But I think there is a mystery within the mystery there about why wasn't this infestation much less manageable. I mean, the truth of the matter is it's a game, so you can't have Amanda in a survival horror face off with 200 of these creatures. But the fact that we don't know if it was egg morphing, we don't know if there's a queen. It said there was a queen there. We never encountered the queen. Another really smart move by the creative team there as well, just to lay hints that this presence may be there. It doesn't spoil anything. It doesn't tell us anything we don't already know, but there is stuff going on also that we don't know. So maybe there was a different way of this infestation growing. It was different than in Aliens, but yeah, good work, creative assembly.
Yeah, again, a really good question, Jamie, and CP, a fantastic answer to it. We actually have an episode coming up in the series where we're going to get into that Queen issue a little bit and into some of these kind of life cycle ideas that have been put forth. But I really love also that that's somewhat mysterious. In my kind of headcanon as I'm playing it, I'm thinking, this station is so massive, like it's really an enormous place with so many different sections that are so firewalled from one another that it feels to me like maybe the alien, didn't need to expand very much because they already had so much real estate and they had so many hosts and they were kind of semi-dormant, I think, until it was blown apart and they were getting ejected into space and everything was kind of on hyperdrive again. So like only one of them really needed to be out there cleaning up the survivors or something, and the rest of them were kind of in like an energy conservation state a little bit. It could also have been Praetorians. It could have been the idea of like the royal jelly allowing some of them to mutate into this like proto-queen form. I love that. I love that we don't really find out much. But to your question, not just in terms of life cycle, but thematically in general, it does feel somewhat different from Alien to me. And I'm trying to kind of figure out why. I think there's almost more of like a humanist streak in Isolation than there is in Alien in some ways. I feel like there are, so in Alien, you have this company plant, right? You have Ash who is actively sabotaging things, carrying out this directive. In Isolation, the synthetic character that you spend the most time with actually ends up being kind of like heroic and sacrificing himself, essentially. You have like you have a couple of kind of Burke-esque figures in this. One of them we've already talked about, Ransom, but another one being Nina Taylor, who's this lawyer who actually accompanies you on the Torrens as you go there. She gets injured. She spends much of the game kind of useless, just like sitting there recuperating. She has this secret directive from the company as well to recover the specimen. She ends up kind of uniting with Ripley in her final moments to try to stop Marlowe from, destroying the ship with this reactor core explosion. Who's to say if she did it to save the lives of the people on board or to save the creature? Kind of left up in the air a little bit, but she doesn't end up being this kind of slimy, manipulative person the way that Burke is, in Aliens. What I'm saying is a lot of the characters reveal themselves to be actually kind of good people who will sacrifice themselves to save the lives of others. A great example of that also is Marlowe. So, Marlowe is kind of, we meet him and he's in this like holding cell. He's kind of an asshole. He's miserable. And then you learn about why. And it's really a sad story. Like we've said, he was the smuggler, he was going there to recover this recorder. And his wife was the one who brought this creature on board the ship. So he had just lost his wife, which is part of why he's being such a shithead. When we meet him, he's miserable. And when he's trying to take down, because he's the one overloading the core, when he's trying to take it down, he's doing it to kill himself, to kill the survivors, but mostly to kill the alien, which of course is also what Ripley was trying to do in the first film and what Amanda goes on to try to do as well. The only difference being that they weren't, sacrificing the lives of humans in the pursuit of this. They were just trying to kill the alien. But Marlowe, having seen what this creature can do, is saying there's no way that we can allow this thing to get back to Earth, to get back to humanity. It has to stop here. And again, so even this character who we're kind of introduced to as being this real asshole ends up having the right motives. We understand where he's coming from when he's trying to destroy it. And so this is all a way of saying that consistently throughout the game, we are encountering characters who reveal themselves to be somewhat more humanistic than we thought they were when we met them. And that gives the whole game kind of a different thematic undercurrent for me. And Alien does this to some degree too, but I think in less of a dramatic way. It just feels like this game is very much this idea of like when all of the chips are down and everybody is up against the wall, there's no way out but through. And they kind of all understand that in a kind of a profound way. And Amanda, of course, embodies that hugely. My last point to this is that there's this other kind of thematic undercurrent in the films of survival. Like Ripley is heroic in the first one because she survives and she gets Jonesy off. And then she's heroic in the second one because she facilitates, as many lives making it through the events of the film as possible. Alien 3, she ends up being incredibly heroic because she takes the queen down with her and blah, 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 blah. In the game, Amanda Ripley does that like the whole time. Her survival instinct is so profound and so strong that even though, as CP and Christian are pointing out wisely, she is like given the most just exhaustive list of horribly dangerous, miserable tasks to carry out with like the very minimum amount of resources to do so. And with basically nobody other than Samuels and Ricardo like ever helping her with anything. Like she's just always going into vents and having a horrible time and trying to find things to attach and to, start up. Even with all of that, even at the end when she's clinging onto a space station that's crashing and she's trying to like thwart off these aliens that are coming at her and she's holding with one finger onto like a handle, she's like so driven to survive. And that is so powerful because you get the sense that she's found her real purpose in this game. Like my friends tonight have also mentioned, she was kind of rudderless before the events of isolation. She was kind of kicking around doing engineering freelance work, not really knowing what she was doing. And in this game, she found that real purpose, and that purpose was to survive long enough to find her mom. And that is that's a pretty profound thing to ask of, a protagonist in a video game. It's a pretty beautiful thing.
What is really interesting about isolation, the humanist element you touch upon, but there are sort of minor acts of heroism that are captured in the log recordings as well that help portray this story of, they're not all out for themselves idiots on this station. There are some good guys in there. One minor character, Hughes, who's the guy we see killed by a working Joe when Amanda is hiding in a vent. He's an interesting one because he's very aware of the dangers they face, because earlier log entries sort of say, "Oh my God, Claire, message to your wife, get our daughter, get the cat, get out of here, because the guy that lives next door to us, he's got a gun on him, he's dangerous." But when comms gets back online, he leaves his wife and child in their safe hole, presumably the cat as well, and then he's slain by that android. But it's sort of that nice little level of heroism demonstrated from someone that has personally got an awful lot to lose. I mean, unlike most of the characters you encounter, he demonstrably has a wife and child. So, this father is still risking it all to get out there to try and save the day for everyone else on the station, as well as his family. And it's really sort of quite a sad thought that his wife and child were probably likely still alive on Sevastopol when the station goes down, some hours after their husband and father left them to try and do what he could to save the situation. There are other examples of this, and sort of Ricardo as well. He's been putting himself in danger to rig explosives, all that sort of thing around the station. And a woman called Winter, she had denied access into the sanctuary that's been set up by the Sinclair from the security team. And we know that they're bad guys. They go around shooting other survivors on the station. They're the ones responsible for letting the alien in Foster through quarantine in the first place. But we even get a log entry from the guy Sinclair, who's the leader, saying, his wife was killed, his child was taken away in this last attack. And the woman Winter that was denied entry said, they're protecting all the children in this sanctuary. So even then, there is some level of goodness or reasoning behind the actions of even these bad guys. They may be killing and looting, but they're trying to do what they can do to protect the station's children. And you never see any of the children in the game. It'd be a really hardcore edge to the game if you see the corpse of a child in the hive reactor. It doesn't go there. But just to know that even the worst people on the station have got that inherent level of humanity within them, again, it just all goes towards that, the compelling nature of the game and the story it tells.
The game doesn't touch the same level of disturbing content with the alien that we had in the original film, but where I felt it really amplified things was with the violence perpetuated by the working Joes. Hughes, that CP was just mentioning, in a cutscene we witness, he's the first person we see killed by a working Joe. but we see corpses that working Joes have shoved magazines down their throats. So it's sort of a very graphic representation of what could have happened to Ripley. And just because I'm such a piss poor player, the working Joes beat me to death repeatedly. And it's a longer death than when the alien kills you. And I ended up feeling so bad for Amanda because I'm just not good at the game. And so she kept getting beaten to death by these robots. And it had a very strong emotional, psychological impact on me because instead of it being the psychosexual thing or anything, it was much more like a domestic abuse situation. This thing is telling me that I'm being hysterical as it punches me and strangles me. And that was something I was not expecting this game to touch on. And I feel that that's sort of the area that they felt they could flex a little bit.
For me, at least in my experience of these films, the real alien, the real threat is the company. The real threat has always been the company. Scariest thing in the room is always the human, because we're capable of so much destruction and terror, while at the same time being capable of so much good and so much love, so many amazing things. So for me, experiencing Alien, so you're well, with Alien Isolation, you're on this space station, but you're not only not safe from the aliens. Yes, that's the big threat, but the bigger threat are the working Joes, are the things turned by the company to save the place no matter what or whatever. And I love that. For me, Alien is all about the character. It's not about the creatures. The creatures are only an element. Of course, it's called Alien. We get it. But it's about what we do in moments of fear, what we do when we're cornered physically, psychologically. How do we react? What do we do? And we see, like in Aliens, we see Burke. We see what he does. We see Hudson, how he just kind of loses his shit. And for me, that's why I watch these films. And I feel like with what I've seen of Isolation, they really go hard on the human element. You're really in her psychology. You're in her head. I mean, of course, you're hearing her, but I just think that they really hit the nail on the head with what this game was about. It's about a person. It's not about the creature. She's dealing with these things, but this is her story. And I really think that, they just had all the right people involved when they created this story.
My closing thought, because I know we need to kind of put this to a stop here, which is unfortunate, but we do have more Isolation episodes, so we will be returning to this. I do want to talk about the creature a little bit, because I do feel like we've given a lot of time to the humans tonight, which we should, and I think that actually speaks a lot to where this game's values lie, because those are the things we remember. But this game just revels in the terrible beauty that the alien expresses. Like it is the most singularly powerful expression of that idea since Alien to me. Like it captures this sense of beauty and menace and darkness in such a fascinating way that scares us all so much that we struggle to play it sometimes. To that end, they made a lot of design decisions because they wanted this creature to function well within the game. One of them that we've already talked about a number of times is with the reverse joint on the lower leg. So it moves almost like a dog in that regard. They did that because it looked unnatural to have, normal kind of Balaji Badejo, legs in a suit walking around in the game. It just didn't animate properly. That simple change that they made works beautifully, in my opinion, for this creature. It turns it into this like tiptoeing nightmare that is so fast and agile and able to duck. And it makes it feel even less human. And I think that, again, part of why this works so well is it's getting after Giger's ideal. Like Giger was consistently frustrated that it looked too human, even with Balaji in the suit, who was incredible. That's why he added the dorsal spines, and that's why he kept kind of playing with the silhouette to try to make it look less human. And ultimately, he was dissatisfied with it because you could still tell it was a person wearing a suit if you saw it in the wrong lighting. And that's part of why we see so little of it in the final product of Alien. What I love, though, is that in Isolation, like we do really get time to see it. And they made those design considerations that they couldn't have done in 1978, 1979 with the suit. And they have it, animate differently and move more fluidly. But then my favorite thing about it is they make it sound different. And that to me is just amazing. I will never forget the first time. There's this wonderful sequence pretty early on in the game where you first encounter the alien. It's a forced cut scene. It's not a random encounter, and it drops down and you hear how heavy it is. And that was like a revelation to me the first time I heard it, because I was like, oh my God, it would be. I mean, it's hundreds of pounds. This thing is 7 to 8 feet tall. It's monstrous. And, in the movies, it might as well be, floating. Like we never hear anything when it's moving around. In this one, the ground shakes when it moves. And when its tail drops down, and there's this beautiful animation that everybody who's played it sees where you're hiding under the table and the tail hits the floor and then kind of slithers out, and it just feels like chains, like heavy chains falling on a warehouse floor and then being pulled away. It is just like the most amazing sound design. And it's important that you pay attention to it, because that ends up being basically how you can survive the game, because you need to know what to listen for. You get really used to what it sounds like when it's in the vents, for example, which is something else that is kind of glossed over in the films. But in this game, because we need it, because it's a game and we need handholds to be able to make it through, we start listening for that, and we can hear it, we can intuit how it's crawling around. That is amazing. The sound of it coming up behind us, the sound of it breathing, the sound of its drool hitting the floor. Like, these are all things that feel legitimately iconic to me at this point, that we didn't get from the movies because we kind of didn't need them. But in the language of video games, where you need these things to progress, Creative Assembly did such an amazing job of making sure what they gave us was truly iconic. So last thing I'll say, everybody remembers the first time they get killed by the alien in Isolation, because it happens to everybody. Like, at some point you can put this off as much as you want to. At some point you're going to stop getting killed by working Joes and you're going to start getting killed by the alien primarily. For a lot of us, that happens, when you're in the medical area. A lot of the time that's where you get kind of caught out and you can't really hide anymore. I remember the first time I got killed, I was in a vent. And I thought I was safe because I figured there's no way I'm going to get caught in this thing. And it fucking opened the vent and grabbed me. And that moment was so elementally scary to me. It was like every nightmare I ever had about this creature as a child, that feeling of like, what would it be like if it actually grabbed my ankle and pulled me out? And then it did. And it pulled me to the ground, and then it came around front so I could see it, and then it killed me. And like, that was, I mean, I get chills talking about it because it's incredible, All that being said, I'll hand it over to the rest of you for your kind of closing thoughts. But I think that this is all part of what this game does so beautifully and why it doesn't feel derivative. I think it feels like it gives us this incredibly deep window into what it's like to experience Alien, and that's kind of what sets it apart.
I'll hop in and just to agree with Patrick. I haven't been killed by an alien in the vent, but I did once encounter the alien very close to me in a vent when I turned my headlamps on. And Lord above, the genuine terror, it is quite something. And Jaime, you're missing out if you haven't fully embraced, and even if you don't have to be a gamer to get involved and just live that fear, because it really is something else. And all I would want to finish with saying is that, I can't give Alien Isolation enough praise, because to me, the top three entries in no particular order will be Alien Isolation, and Aliens. And I think all three of them mesh together so wonderfully that it doesn't matter that it's a game. To me, it is as real a part of the universe as either of the films, arguably more so because of that palpable sense of terror that you as the gamer are put through. And I think it's so much better than anything else that has been released in the Alien universe since 1986. And I know that there's a different level of acceptance of Alien 3 and perhaps fandom, and even in this group here as well. But for me, Alien Isolation was a story that warranted telling, and arguably it needed telling, because you've got this mystery character, Amanda Ripley, that is referenced, and finding out something about her story and about her bid to find her mother is a really interesting story, I think. You compare that to Alien 3, and regardless of how well directed and acted it was, that to me was just a story that didn't need to be told. And I'd say that based on the fact that it took them so long to get a good script. And, I've read the Vince Ward script. I thought it was absolute balderdash. yet elements of what he brought into it, even though rejected, carried into the final film, and they're messing around with things until the very last minute. The careless killing of Newton Hicks. I mean, we're not here to slate Alien 3, I know, but it has its merits. But to me, you don't need to make a film or tell a story unless you have got that story fully fleshed out and planned, and it's a story that needs telling. That's why, to me, Alien 3 and Resurrection and the prequels, they were all stories that didn't need telling. There may be merits in all of the films. Alien Isolation, to me, is the story that needed telling alongside the first two films, and it's just so wonderful. And then people out there, it only sold between 2 and 3 million copies. If you've got an Xbox or a PlayStation or a Switch now, please play this game, because it's so wonderful. It represents everything good about the Alien franchise as a whole.
So my last thing that I wanted to say was, we didn't talk about what this game does for Ellen Ripley. And as fans, what a gift it is that Sigourney Weaver came back. It's also a testament to what Creative Assembly did, because this is not the first game that asked her if she wanted to participate. And you can just imagine, Sigourney Weaver not wanting to have anything to do with the arcade style shoot 'em ups that have come before this. But when they presented her with a game where it was about her daughter, that we knew, it was heartbreaking for Sigourney that was cut out of the original cut of Aliens, but that also what they wanted her to do was such a beautiful, it's very small, but such a beautiful piece, a message that Ellen recorded specifically for Amanda, and that is, and probably will always be, the last thing Sigourney Weaver ever contributed to the Alien saga, because she said she's done. It's too late for another go of playing Ellen. But she recorded this message, and the word choice is so simple and eloquent, and it gets me every time I hear it. And it's the beating heart at the center of this, because, as CP said, the story needed to be told, if for no other reason than to give us a taste of what that relationship was. Because when I watch Alien, I don't believe that Ripley had a daughter. When I watch the special edition of Aliens, my preferred cut, I immediately believe that she had a daughter. But there's a schism between those two things. There's a slight problem. So this game gives us that little bit, that Amanda did exist, that Ellen did care, and now we have that as fans to hold on to. And so, CP, I just wanted to thank you just quick for coming on, because this has been such a wonderful conversation, and we've agreed on so many things. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for having me. I know when I originally emailed Patrick, I did say, hey, if you need a guest, consider me, but I didn't actually think I would ever end up on the show. I was just really pleased to hear that you were planning an Alien Isolation series. So yeah, thank you. Love your work, guys. And it's been nice to hang out.
Of course.
Thank you. Thank you for coming on the show.
And I want to make sure we get to plug your work. And before I do, I have to say one last thing. I'm sorry, but based on what Christian was just beautifully elucidating, at the end of her message, she says the words, "I love you, sweetheart." And I think part of why that gets me so hard every time is so many of us talk about Ripley in terms of being our space mom. Like, we talk about growing up with her as like our female role model and as somebody that we feel protected by, and who's been there for many of us at times where we've been kind of scared, and dealing with things. And Ripley was kind of this beacon for us. And I think because we get to that point, having spent so many hours playing as Amanda, and the lines between us as the player and Amanda kind of get blurred after a while, because we just are kind of her in this game. When Ripley says that, it reaches across time and across story, and it feels like she's talking to us. Like, it feels like she's talking to me. And that's why I just cry every time I hear that. I think it's an immensely beautiful moment in any art, let alone a fucking video game produced by Sega, by a company that had no idea what it was doing and ended up churning out the most incredible masterpiece I've ever seen in a video game. I'm getting choked up thinking about it. CP, before we leave, you have a tremendously interesting other career outside of just coming on tonight's show. Can you give listeners a little insight into that and where they might find more?
Yes, thank you. So CP comes from my sort of online moniker Columbo File, because I love Columbo, the TV detective, particularly his 1970s incarnation. So Alien is secondary love, but I do blog extensively, or I have done over the years, about Columbo, and you can see that at columbofile.com. That's file, Phile. So if you love Columbo and Aliens, then I tell you what, you're going to get a lot out of him.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, my friend. Thank you for writing into us too.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. To find out more information about Perfect Organism, the Alien Saga podcast, please go to www.perfectorganism.com. If you would like to support the show, please go to www.perfectorganism.com/support. Thank you.